All right, we're going to talk about primitive reflexes. And first and foremost, I want to talk about what primitive reflexes are from like just a basic standpoint and helping you guys understand from a rehab perspective what you're trying to do, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, or even a lot of false information, I would say, even. Because, like, I've heard, let's say, for example, the ATNR, I've heard, oh, it can take up to 18 months to integrate it. Why would it take a child 18 months to integrate an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex that should go away in the first 8 months of life? A child is 8 months old. They have almost no brain maturity happening. I mean, a lot's happening during that time, but like their brain is very immature compared to an 8-year-old. Why would it take an 8-year-old 18 months or let's say even 6 months to get rid of a reflex that should go away in the first 6 months of life? The brain is so much more complex and mature at this age. It should not take that long, or even anywhere close to that long, to get rid of the reflex. If it should have gone away at 6 months, or even a palm grasp should go away in the first 3 or 4 months of life. Why should it take any longer than that to get rid of it if they're approaching them appropriately? So, and I understand, yes, there can be brain injuries, there can be that type of stuff, but even let's say you're starting from ground zero and there's a brain injury, and in some cases, yes, you can't get rid of them based off a brain injury. If it's severe enough and the neurons are all dead, like you're probably not going to make a really significant change there, right? But that's a severe case. That's not your normal case. So in your average child that has a reading issue or a learning issue or a behavioral issue or maybe an attentional issue, these should integrate much, much quicker than when they should develop in the first place. So always kind of think back of that. If someone's like, oh, rehab-wise, yeah, you're going to have to work on this for 6 to 18 months. Well, it should have gone away in 6 months, so why would it ever be any longer than that? That just doesn't make sense to me, because that brain is so much more mature. So always think about that first and foremost. But overall, primitive reflexes, we all have them. Everyone looking at me right now on the screen has primitive reflexes. They are survival reflexes. They will be there forever. Only time you ever see them is if your brain can't function well enough to inhibit them or shut them down. So it's really not, the primitive reflex is the symptom. It's not the problem. I know it's a big thing because I talk a lot about primitive reflexes. I talk a lot about the importance of integrating them, which is very important to do, but it's not the problem. It's the symptom. It means their brain isn't healthy enough or firing efficiently enough or functioning well enough to inhibit that reflex. And a lot of you probably think, well, why is it not healthy enough? So we're going to talk about it in the lifestyle aspect, because there's a lot of stuff in our lifestyle and our environment that creates a very unhealthy brain. Our environment is set up for a child to fail, to be honest. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But anyways, so really the key when we're working on primitive reflexes, yes, the movements are important. I love doing the movements for a lizard, or for an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, or crawling with their head turned, or those basic movement patterns. I think are excruciatingly important, but they're not the only thing, or they're not the most important thing, I would say. So when we're looking at primitive reflexes, think back first of what areas of the brain are weak, what foundational systems are weak, are they getting enough oxygen, are they getting enough energy? When you take care of those, and can they move without having a lot of reflexive abnormal movement? If you take care of those things, normally their primitive reflexes go away extremely quickly and on their own. If a child can move their head through full range of motion, likely their primitive reflexes are going to go away in a lot of cases. So always look at the foundational things first, and also figure out what type of sensory information, like does light or sound on their left side, or vibration on their left side, or an adjustment on their left side, or this could be the right side as well, but does an adjustment on their body, or does vestibular input improve their reflexes? That's how you I use these reflexes to find out what area of the brain is the weakest, or what area of the brain is weak, what areas need stimulated. When we stimulate the brain appropriately, see, I always explain to parents this way. When we fire up the brain appropriately, let's say the right side's weaker than the left, or whatever it may be, when we fire up that brain appropriately, now the brain can come in and say, hey, I don't need these reflexes. Let's shut them down so we can create more complex movements. So you fire up the brain can communicate more efficiently, and the brain goes and shuts those reflexes down. Now we can turn our head without our shoulder reflexively moving. Now we can, stroke the hand without it grasping. Now we can open up more complex movements. We can start working on more complex systems. We can start working on all the systems that should develop off of that, like our balance centers and our eye tracking centers and all those systems. But so don't think about the reflex as, I have to integrate this reflex. I need to do 1,000 movements for it. I need to do all that type of stuff. Once you activate the brain efficiently, do the appropriate foundational things, usually the reflex goes away really quickly. That's kind of the key. I'm going to give you a breakdown of a bunch of different exercises that we do for primitive reflexes. I'm going to, there's videos of all the stuff we do for them, but I'm going to talk over them and explain why we do that exercise. But I just want you to remember in this is, just because that kid has an 18R, I'm not going to make him go crawl for the next 3 hours. I'm going to do a bunch of stuff to make sure they have enough oxygen, make sure they have enough ATP, make sure we're stimulating the correct areas of the brain. And in conjunction with that, I'm going to start doing some activities to reinforce normal function of these primitive reflexes or normal integration of these reflexes. So I just want you to remember that in the back of your head. The problem isn't the reflex. The problem is the brain. And when the brain can develop more efficiently, the reflex goes away. So I can't stress that enough. So I want to make sure I say it over and over and over again, because there's a mindset out there that, the reflex is really the biggest issue and it has to be worked on for months on end. And I have not once found that to be true. So I hope I can kind of push you guys away from that and help you understand that as the brain matures, this becomes less and less of an issue. So we'll start breaking down all those videos and we'll go from there. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. To learn more or to schedule an intensive or anything with my team, there's a link below. Just go ahead and click that and that'll get you to the right spot. Have an awesome day.